What's up, my beautiful people? Once again, we found ourselves into a situation where China and the US are on an intense battle. One of the things that resulted into the markets to not end so well yesterday was because of some of this announcement that President Trump of the US announced with regards China, right? And this comes after China said they are going to put some restriction measures onto their rare earth. And you will know that when you talk about rare earth, especially with China, their global production dwarfs the other countries all over the world, right? Have a look at those figures as per the end of 2023. You will notice that the rare earth metals for China are 353.7 kilotons, whilst of course the US rare earth metals, it's around 43 kilotons. And this shows you that China accounted in 2023 over 2/3 of global rare earth metals production in 2023, and with an annual growth rate of around 9.9% since 2013. Because China right now wants to impose large scale of export controls on virtually every product they make, including the rare earth minerals, Trump is threatening to impose 100% of tariff starting from the 1st of November. Now, this obviously it's something that is not good, right? But however, like I've been sharing the sentiment about the two countries, I think China might have the upper hand onto this one because, look, the United States of America has tried to impose restrictions onto the chips that NVIDIA is sending onto China, saying that some of the chips must be stopped or they must hold taking some of those chips into China, trying to slow down, I think, the technology or the growth that we are seeing into the AI technology into China. But that did not work because our favorite EV stock like NIO, right? Because of the restrictions that not only happened or are happening right now under the Trump administration, that also happened under the Biden administration. China has urged their local companies to start producing chips in-house. Just a couple of 2-3 weeks ago, we read that China is stopping all of their companies locally to buy chips from NVIDIA. They are saying all of the chips that they want, they should consider going to Huawei, because Huawei, the same similar chips that they buy from NVIDIA, Huawei is producing those chips. You will know, for instance, like for the autonomous driving chips, our very own NIO mass produce their own autonomous driving chip, that is the Shenji NX9031 chip. And these came after or during the Biden administration. We saw obviously NVIDIA being told to not supply, I think it was the H100 NVIDIA chips. Chinese companies already were making alternatives, trying to hedge against those implications that were being made under the Biden administration. And that whole thing continued even or went over even now in the Trump administration. As you know that, I think Trump restricted the H20 chips, which all that is just making, I think, China to be strong, because China right now, not only are new energy vehicle car makers producing their own chips like NIO, but also Huawei, it's ensuring that almost all the chips that the Chinese companies were getting from NVIDIA, they are producing them. Autonomous driving chips that you see onto some of the new energy vehicle car makers, I think Chery also, they are all coming from Huawei, right? I think the computing power of their latest Huawei autonomous driving chip, it's I think 620, 650, which shows you that, look, Huawei is really serious when it comes to going into chips, and they want to ensure that the chips that the Chinese consumers, or the Chinese companies rather, and they want to ensure that the chips that the Chinese companies were getting from NVIDIA, they can have an alternative to get those chips from them. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that even if the US is to impose more tariffs or restricting some of the technologies from the US to penetrate China, China has already learned from the past and they are ready for that, and the US might not know. So this whole scenario, it's what led the markets to crash yesterday, because the market was not sure what is going to happen, right? That is what led even our NIO stock price to finish down 10%, right? But something that you must note about the sharp fall that we saw yesterday, NIO does not really get to be impacted by the tariffs that, of course, Trump threatens to impose onto them. NIO is not selling cars in the US. NIO is not selling any products in the US as yet. So the harm, it will be very minimal, right? Which I think we need to take cognizance of that, is to say that the market is just panicking, but the panic of the market does not mean that there's a big impact that will hit NIO. I think for this one, I think I'll just also do a separate video just telling you maybe into detail why this does not have much impact onto NIO. But to summarize, it's because obviously NIO is not selling any cars in the US right now. But something that even made the markets to be a bit shaky, it was, you will know that Trump had made it clear, I think a couple of weeks, if not months, that he's not willing to go and meet with the Chinese president, Mr. President Xi Jinping. But yesterday, during a session where he was talking, or when he was talking about these tariffs, he highlighted that, look, he plans on meeting with President Xi Jinping. And now some of the people are starting to think or wonder, is this not because Trump is seeing that they don't have quite a lot of options or cards that they can play against China, and therefore he realizes that meeting with Xi Jinping might open up some good cards also for the US? This is what is making the markets to obviously react the way it's reacting right now, because it looks like at the end of the day, from rare earth minerals, I mean, to the magnets that are utilized to build the cars that you are seeing in the US, most of those magnets, the power of those magnets are coming from China. Without China, the industry can collapse. Without China, the industry, in fact, can struggle. The car industry in the US can struggle because strong magnets are only found where? In China. And President Trump has also spoken about this and confirmed. I mean, the Ford CEO is the very same, is the first guy that made me to be aware of how the auto industry in the US really needs China, because there is nowhere else where you'll get the kind of markets that, the kind of magnets that, of course, China is giving to the automakers or in the US, which is something that is very, very, very important. So Trump coming and say he wants to impose, or he will impose, of course, this 100% of tariffs if the restrictions that China intends on putting on all of their export material, including rare earth. It's a game that really you cannot predict the outcome, or you cannot really put a stamp to say that US will get what they want from China, right? Because China, like I said, you cannot really punish them, or the US cannot really punish them, because the cards are running out for the US. Because at first they thought restricting chips to China will stop or will slow down the growth of China. But guess what? We've got DeepSeek now. That is one of the best open AI one of the best AI platforms that you can find in the world. You've got stocks or companies like NIO that their technology is on the next level. In fact, the global technology software index, which is Gartner, it showed that NIO comes second from Tesla globally, which shows you the kind of technology, which shows you the kind of massive breakthrough that we are getting to see, or we are seeing, especially in China, which this, my friends, something that I like, something that is just so good. So when I saw this, I thought obviously I come and tell you, or we discuss about this, or I discuss with you about this to say, what do you think is going to happen? But I think right now, President Trump I'm sure he's realizing that some of his advisors probably, they are not realizing where China is headed. And it's like what the president of Russia said, right? Vladimir Putin. He said trying to stop China from developing AI or growing when it comes to technology, it's like trying to stop the sun from rising. It can never happen. China, in so many ways, China right now, I think they've got good cards to play, and I think it's high time that the US comes down and they just try to find a good deal or strike a good deal with China, because I think that US, in as much as China needs the US, US also needs China. We don't know to what extent, but they do need China, because the scenario where I gave you about chips, the scenario where I gave you about rare earth metals, magnets, they really need, of course, China for that to happen. I mean, can you imagine what will happen if China stops supplying magnets onto the automakers in the US? It's going to really compromise on the kind of quality that you find onto the US based automakers or companies that are producing cars, right? So in as much as China needs the US to some point, US also needs China, right? Without China, US will not flourish, will not succeed. And if you have a look at what China has been doing, they've been looking at other alternatives, trying to find alternative trades and not really depend mostly onto the US. And this, my dear friends, it's one thing that, another card, a strong card that China is playing. They are making trade deals with Canada, they are making trade deals with Australia and the other countries, and this is to try to hedge against whatever the US might come and do in the future. But anyways, I don't want to make this video that long. Tell me what you think about this. I think for our very own NIO stock, like I said, there's not much impact onto the kind of news, because NIO, it's not yet selling cars into the US. NIO, it's still selling most of their cars in China and in Europe, together with UAE. But US, NIO has not penetrated, because the US, you know, it has been making it extremely difficult for Chinese EV makers to be able to sell their cars. But anyways, I don't want to make this video too long, right? Tell me what you think. I'll see you on the next one. Like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, because it takes me some time to make videos like this. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one. That is all from me, and God bless you all.